If simply declaring who you are is all that's required, then I meet every single requirement necessary to compete in the WNBA. My team and I have carefully examined the WNBA's eligibility criteria and governing framework surrounding self-identification and inclusion. Based on the current guidelines, I can and am officially declaring my eligibility for the upcoming WNBA draft in May 2027.
When a 6'10" former NBA center declares himself eligible for the WNBA draft, it sounds like satire. It sounds like the kind of headline you scroll past because surely,
in one place. Go to supersure.com/Megan, paid for by Supersure Insurance Agency, LLC, a licensed insurance agency. Two former NBA first-round draft picks now declaring themselves eligible for the 2027 WNBA draft in an apparent effort to force the league to more clearly define what a woman is. It's really not that hard, people. The declarations coming amid.
surely it cannot be real. But here is the problem with that assumption. The rules, as written, do not say he cannot. And that is not a joke. That is a legal invitation. Before we go deeper into what the evidence actually shows, make sure you're subscribed to CrimeNest Media, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the facts. Imagine a door, a heavy door, steel reinforced, locked with a deadbolt that has been there for decades. On the other side of that door is a basketball court, a professional arena, a league built by women, for women, after generations of fighting for recognition. Now imagine someone walking up to that door, not with a key, not with a battering ram, but with a piece of paper that says the lock does not actually work. And they are right, the lock was never installed. The door was never secured. And when they push it open, the only response from the people inside is to say we recognize this is a complex and nuanced topic. That is where we are with the WNBA in August of 2026. The story begins with a woman named Sophie Cunningham.
Weeks of controversy inside the WNBA after Indiana Fever guard Sophie Cunningham publicly argued that biological men should not be allowed to compete against.
She plays guard for the Indiana Fever. In the weeks before the declarations, Cunningham did something that should not be controversial. She said that biological men should not compete against women.
Kanter freedom, changing the conversation. The 6'10" center selected third overall in the 2011 NBA draft, going on to play a.
That is it. She stated a fact. She stated the premise upon which women's sports were founded.
In an apparent effort to force the league to more clearly define what a woman is. It's really not that hard, people. The declarations coming amid.
And for that, she was met with the full weight of a league that suddenly discovered it had no idea what a woman actually is. Coaches were pressed. Players were pressed. The question became unavoidable. Do you believe men pretending to be women should be allowed on the court? Silence.
Pretending to be women should be allowed to compete in women's basketball. Then on Friday, former NBA center Enes.
Evasion. We recognize this is complex. Then, on a Friday in early August, a former NBA center named Enes Kanter Freedom posted a video.
I am definitely not here to mock, make fun of, or disrespect any community or personal choices. I am simply asking that the current rule.
Kanter Freedom is 34 years old. He was the third overall pick in the 2011 NBA draft. He played 11 seasons. He averaged 11 points and nearly 8 rebounds per game. By any measure, he is a professional athlete at the highest level. And in that video, he looked directly into the camera and said this: "If simply declaring who you are is all that is required, then I meet every single requirement necessary to compete in the WNBA." He was calm. He was deliberate. He was not mocking anyone. He was reading the rules out loud. And then he said, "I am officially declaring my eligibility for the upcoming WNBA draft in May 2027. Within hours, another former NBA first-round pick joined him, Royce White.
Right now, I'm just having a blast in my feminine era. I never thought that I was a woman. You know, I've always trusted.
White is also running for the Republican nomination for an open U.S. Senate seat in Minnesota. He went on Fox News and said, with a straight face, that he was having a blast in his feminine era.
The science, and I thought I was a man my entire life, but you know, after further review, strong look at my personal preferences.
He said that after further review, he appears to be sometimes identifying as a transgender woman.
It would appear that I am indeed sometimes identifying as a transgender woman, and I think it's only fair I get a chance to play with some.
He said he wanted a chance to play with his queens in the twilight of his career.
WNBA Commissioner Kathy Engelbert sending a memo, obtained by the Associated Press, to all WNBA teams on
The irony was not subtle. The point was not subtle. They were holding up a mirror to a league that had spent years congratulating itself on its commitment to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And the league had no answer. Now, let us stop here and talk about what the WNBA actually says.
Shortly after Kanter Freedom's announcement, former NBA first-round pick Royce White also announcing that he intends to end.
The collective bargaining agreement has one sentence on the subject. Only players who are women are eligible to play in the WNBA. That is it. No definition of the word women, no medical criteria, no hormone thresholds.
They're defining the term women or establishing specific eligibility rules for transgender players. Although, in the wake of Sophie Cunningham's statements,
no athletic testing, no framework whatsoever. The agreement does not further define the term women. It does not establish specific eligibility rules for transgender players. It is a single sentence that assumes everyone knows what a woman is. And in 2026, that assumption has become a liability. The WNBA commissioner, Kathy Engelbert, sent a memo to all teams acknowledging that transgender participation is attracting increasing attention.
Engelbert writing, quote, "We recognize that this is a complex and nuanced topic," while telling teams that league officials will continue conversations.
She wrote that the league would continue conversations with team leaders and the Players Association.
With both team leaders and the Players Association. The commissioner also writing that trans eligibility.
She wrote that the league would continue conversations with team leaders and the Players Association.
In the league and its union. The WNBA Players Association also releasing a statement on Friday reaffirming it.
But she did not say no. She did not say, these men cannot play. She said, we recognize that this is a complex and nuanced topic. Here is the ticking clock moment. What happens when two former NBA players actually show up at training camp? What happens when they file the paperwork, when they sign the contracts, when they demand to be evaluated alongside women who have trained their entire lives for this opportunity? If simply declaring who you are is all that is required, then on what basis can the league exclude them? On what basis can any woman on that court say, you do not belong here? The league has spent years championing the principle that identity is self-determined. They have condemned hate and demonization targeting transgender people. They have reaffirmed their commitment to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And now, those principles have been taken at their word. The door is open. The question is not whether the league will let Kanter Freedom and Royce White in. The question is whether the league can legally keep them out. That is the thriller. That is the collision between ideology and reality. And the clock is ticking. The Players Association released a statement reaffirming its commitment to the same language.
Targeting transgender people. Great. Let that inclusion include Kanter Freedom and Royce White. See how that goes.
Justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. They condemned hate. They did not condemn two biological men declaring themselves eligible for a women's league. They did not say, this is absurd. They did not say, this is not what we meant. They said nothing that would actually prevent the declarations from moving forward. The silence is the story. The silence is the admission. The WNBA built a system where gender is self-declared and then acted surprised when someone declared themselves into it. And that is the central irony of this entire affair. The league that proudly proclaimed there is no single definition of a woman now finds itself unable to define a woman. The league that championed inclusion above all else now finds itself legally obligated to include people it never intended to include. The rules were written with good intentions, but good intentions do not stop a 6'10" center from walking through a door that was never locked. Let us revisit that phrase one more time. Only players who are women are eligible, but the WNBA never defined what a woman is. The agreement not further defining the term. Not further defining. That is not an oversight. That is a deliberate choice. That is a choice made by people who believe that defining the term would be exclusionary, that it would be harmful, that it would violate the values they claim to hold. And now, that choice has produced the exact outcome it was designed to prevent. A league that was supposed to showcase the best female athletes in the world is now forced to consider whether it can legally reject two men who have declared themselves eligible. The commitment to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion was supposed to protect marginalized people. Instead, it has created a loophole big enough to drive a basketball court through. Now, consider the parallel narrative unfolding in real time. The declarations did not happen in a vacuum. They happened in the same week that a Michigan Senate candidate refused to say whether he would campaign with a streamer who said America deserved 9/11. They happened in the same week that a Wisconsin state representative who called to abolish the police and cancel Thanksgiving was leading in the polls by double digits. They happened in the same week that a celebrity gossip blogger was hospitalized under the Baker Act after live streaming self-harm. The connective tissue is not political. The connective tissue is cognitive dissonance. It is the gap between what people say and what people do. It is the gap between the rhetoric of inclusion and the reality of what inclusion actually requires. The WNBA is not alone in this gap. It is just the most visible example, and the most ironic. Kanter Freedom said he is not here to mock, make fun of, or disrespect any community or personal choices.
Prepared to ensure these guidelines are applied equally, consistently, and without exception. And I look forward to the WNBA honoring its stated.
He said he is simply asking that the current rules be applied equally to everyone. He said his team is prepared to ensure these guidelines are applied equally, consistently, and without exception.
The WNBA's player eligibility rules are collectively bargained between the league and its union. The WNBA Players Association.
That is the most devastating part of this story. He did not break the rules. He followed them. He read the fine print. He saw that the lock was never installed, and he walked through the door. The WNBA cannot say he is wrong without admitting that its entire framework is wrong. They cannot exclude him without betraying the principles they have spent years defending. They cannot tell him no without telling the world that their commitment to inclusion has limits. And that is the uncomfortable truth that no one wants to say out loud. The rules, as written, do not say he cannot play. The WNBA's governing framework surrounding self-identification and inclusion says exactly the opposite. And if the league changes the rules now, they will have to admit that the rules were broken from the start. Let us go back to that quote one final time. Only players who are women are eligible. But they never defined it. And that is not a legal technicality. That is a philosophical failure. That is the consequence of building a system on vague aspirations instead of clear definitions. The WNBA now has two choices. They can change the rules and admit they were wrong. Or they can let two former NBA players compete against women and admit they were wrong. Either way, the commitment to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion has produced a result that no one in the league office ever anticipated. A result that makes a mockery of the very concept of women's sports.
Old Kanter Freedom in a social media video declaring himself eligible for the 2027 WNBA draft, effectively daring the league to explain why he cannot play.
A result that proves, beyond any reasonable doubt, that words have meaning and that refusing to define them does not make you inclusive. It makes you vulnerable. Now let us close with a specific document. The WNBA's collective bargaining agreement is publicly available. You can read it yourself. You can search for the word woman. You can search for the word transgender. You will find that the only eligibility requirement is that sentence, and that sentence does not define what a woman is. That is the source. That is the record. That is the evidence that this is not a hoax, not a conspiracy, not a joke. It is the law. So here is the question we will leave you with. If the WNBA cannot define a woman, why should anyone believe that their commitment to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion protects anyone at all? Read the document, read the fine print, and then ask yourself who is really being included here. Thank you for watching. If this story made you think, hit like, share this with someone who needs to see it, subscribe to CrimeNest Media, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next deep dive. We follow the facts so you can see the truth.